Congress. Carlson only released that part one of his interview with Devon Archer so far. But Devon Archer's full testimony is in front of Congress, is now public. Could its revelations be damaging to the White House? In his testimony, Archer says that President Biden was a component of his son's business dealings. He also said Hunter used his connections to his father and the Biden family name to further his business goals. Archer was sent a letter by the Justice Department on Saturday before his testimony to Congress. It ordered him to begin a prison sentence related to a separate legal situation. The Justice Department clarified that he would not be sent to prison before his congressional testimony. A deadly collision in Oregon. A freight train crashed into a car last night, killing 3 people. A 4th was seriously injured. The crash occurred Wednesday in Marion County, close to Oregon's capital of Salem. According to local media outlet KVAL, the injured person was airlifted to a hospital. County officials closed Keene Road northeast for hours after the accident. The investigation is ongoing. A hazmat incident in Hurricane Utah yesterday. Authorities say roughly 180 gallons of unused motor oil leaked out of a transport truck. Responding crews discovered that a fitting on the truck carrying the oil had failed. As a result, the oil didn't dispense into the holding tank as intended and spilled over into a storm drain. No details about where the storm drain leads to were provided. Hurricane Valley Fire and Rescue is working with the city as well as state health and environmental authorities to monitor the issue. They called in a cleaning company specializing in hazardous materials to clean up the spill. Coming up, verbally harassing his 12-year-old son. At the time of the incident, law enforcement declined to pursue charges, but a year later, FBI agents raided his home. House attorneys says 20 heavily armed agents went to his home.
This is ridiculous.
Door, and at least 5 agents pointed guns at Mark's head and arrested him in front of his wife and children. A spokesman for the FBI field office told multiple publications that no agents pointed guns at Houck or his family members.
Really?
He acknowledged they drew weapons when they approached his front door. Houck was ultimately found not guilty of the charges. 3 Idaho residents were
is going to hurt our ability to cut our growing debt. Private sector hiring is heating up this summer. The payroll firm ADP says private companies added 324,000 jobs last month. That was a lot more than expected. And speaking of work, can you guess what most employers say is their top operational priority? Well, a new report from the company Gallagher says it's employee retention. And it even outranked things like revenue. The high turnover rate last year is a big reason why. And a new study by Charles Schwab says the average person now thinks they're going to need to save $1.8 million to retire. That's up from last year when people said they'd need $1.7 million. Meanwhile, only 37% of workers think they're very likely to reach that goal. That's 10% fewer than last year. That's business. I'm David Asman.
Which they're expecting slower economic growth over the next few years from high regulations, high taxes, and some of the productivity and population changes. That means you're not going to have as much in revenue. And at the same time, they're expecting higher increases in spending, mainly from mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare. And at some point, we've got to get control over these spending, or we're going to have, massive deficits and interest payments for the future. And that's why Fitch said, you know what, we're going to downgrade to AA+ instead of AAA, which is going to raise interest rates, which will also slow economic growth. And so all these things are coming to fruition now. We really need Congress to get control of spending.
Vance, what does all this mean for everyday Americans and their wallets?
Everyday Americans have already been struggling over the last couple of years from the excess government spending, higher taxes, higher regulations, and more inflation, unfortunately, across the economy. And unfortunately, this sort of a downgrade means that we're going to have higher interest rates. We've already seen interest rates go up. We saw the stock market kind of tank over the last couple of days. This is something that I think we'll continue to see if Congress and the Biden administration don't do something about spending. We really must do that because we've got to put America back on a path to let people prosper instead of this big government sort of poverty-stricken situation that we have now, where we have debt for the foreseeable future. This is not a good situation. We've got to overcome it quickly.
And what do you think can be done to overcome it?
Well, I think what we really need to do is Congress needs to get in and do zero-based budgeting, performance-based budgeting throughout the government, and do audits. I think independent audits of different areas of the government would help us to shine some light on where they should be cutting, which programs are working, which ones are not, and ultimately a spending rule, a fiscal rule is what I like to call it, based on population growth and inflation as a maximum. And if we had done that over the last 20 years, we would have only increased the debt by $500 billion instead of $19 trillion. That's a lot more easier to handle based on economic growth and forecasts and everything else. And instead, they're just spending one year after another just too much. And so we've got to do something about that soon.
Well, Van Skyn, thank you very much.
We're the people working in the Amazon warehouse. It's the same thing. Everybody's getting squeezed.
The actors tell Reuters work stoppages will continue.
Streaming services.
If they think that they're going to, we're going to quit because it's hot, or we're going to quit because we're living check to check. Well, because of the current system, we've all been living check to check, and we're used to that. So if anybody's a survivor, it's the actor. And I think that we're in it to win it. So we're out there as long as it takes.
And if you have any news tips or feedback for the show, please feel free to email us.
As using artificial intelligence, they're going to be able to shift their personnel away from those, shall we say, lower level tasks of inputting information to now be able to focus in on the audit process. So how it all comes together here, the IRS gets everything digitized. They have all the historical information digitized. They use AI to sort through all that, and then they start targeting people for audits. So that's the other side of the scale here. There's some good and there's some not so good news for taxpayers.
All right, thank you so much, America's Accountant. Great speaking to you.
Thank you.